Good evening from London and welcome to the Greek Archaeological Committee's 67th lecture. I am Zeta Theodoropoulou Polychroniadis, chair of the committee and your host this evening. I thank you all for joining us. Let me please mention some protocols which I'm sure most of you are aware of about this evening's session. Other than panelists, all cameras and microphones will be off by default. There will be no discussion after the lecture, but you may use the chat button to send your comments and questions. Our speaker will respond to you directly by email. This evening, we are delighted to welcome a distinguished archaeologist, Dr. Maria Tsimpidou Avlonitou, Emeritus Director of the 16th Ephorate of Prehistoric and Classical Antiquities, a native of Thessaloniki, the capital of northern Greece. The title of her lecture is The Macedonian Tombs at Phoinikas and Agios Athanasios, Thessaloniki, Greece, to astonishing monuments of the 4th century BC and their contribution to the understanding of ancient Greek painting. This second annual lecture of the current academic year is one of the Greek Archaeological Committee's UK's two aims. That is, to promote Greek archaeology outside Greece by presenting the latest important archaeological discoveries in Greece and Cyprus to a wider learned public. A British registered charity founded in London 30 years ago by the late Mati Egon Xilas, GACUK has been granting annual scholarships for postgraduate studies in archaeology at leading UK universities to Greek and Greek Cypriot students. In spite of the meteoric increase of fees, GACUK manages to continue to do so. Our 77 scholars, all leading academics in their field, now hold prestigious posts in the UK, in Greece, elsewhere in Europe and in the US, and in return, they promote the study of the Hellenic cultural heritage through their work. The scholarships are made possible thanks to donations generously made by Mati's children, Stamati and Nicholas, the A.G. Levendis Foundation, and other donors, but also through the annual subscriptions of our devoted members. As we safeguard GACUK's legacy, we hope you will join us in our mission by either becoming a member of our charity or make a one-time donation, which will go towards our scholarship fund. Every donation makes a difference. Please visit our website, gacuk.org, for membership and donations. And now back to our speaker. Dr. Maria Tsimpidou Avlonitou was born and studied in Thessaloniki, where she was awarded her PhD from the Aristotle University. She specializes in ancient Greek religion, in the architecture of funerary monuments, as well as burial practices and vase painting of the Hellenistic period in ancient Macedonia. She has served for nearly 30 years, ultimately as head of the Department of Archaeological Sites, Monuments and Research of the former 16th Ephorate of Prehistoric and Classical Antiquities in Thessaloniki. She has excavated many sites and cemeteries of the Hellenistic and Roman periods in the precinct of Thessaloniki, focusing on Macedonian tombs and their iconography. A prolific writer, she has published widely and has participated in many international conferences. She is unquestionably an expert in the funerary painting of the Hellenistic and early Roman periods. So, let us give her the floor to let her guide us to these exquisite monuments, which our fellow archaeologists systematically bring to light, enriching our knowledge of the glory of Macedonia. Dr. Tsimpidou.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the Greek Archaeological Committee of UK and especially its chair, Dr. Zeta Theodoropoulou, for their most kind invitation, which gave me the opportunity to be here with you today. The so-called Macedonian tombs constitute a special category of funerary monuments the use of which spread mainly to the northern Greek area during the peak years of the Macedonian dynasty, that's to say, from the middle of the 4th century until the middle of the 2nd century BC. Most of them belonged to important hetairai, companions of the Macedonian king, or to wealthy local lords or landowners. They are the most impressive ancient Greek funerary monuments in terms of their construction and decoration. To date, more than 100 tombs have been discovered, either individual ones or groups of them near the great centers of the time, like Aegae, Pella, Thessaloniki, etc. Despite the fact that almost all of them were looted even from antiquity, they not only provide evidence on late classical and Hellenistic architecture and monumental painting, but also suggest the social organization and the burial customs in ancient Macedonia. They are underground buildings with vaulted roofs comprising 1 or 2 chambers, which after their construction were covered with soil in the shape of a conical cumulus. A rough ashlar was used, usually coated with fine white plaster, in order to give the impression of marble. At this point, I should refer to Plato, Laws 947d, in which he describes the funerary rites of the leading citizens of his ideal state and their tombs, which were to be different from those of all other citizens. A description written not later than 350 BC that fits exactly to Macedonian tombs and their function. Another characteristic is the regular temple-like facade with Doric, Ionic, or even more elaborate entablature. The architectural features are often emphasized with various colors, while in some cases, impressive painted compositions decorate the facade or even the interior. In the main chamber, there were usually 1 or more kline, couches, on which the dead were placed. The number of burials in some of these tombs shows that they were monuments where the members of a certain family were successively buried. Sometimes a ceremonial cremation, reminding the Homeric funerary rites still surviving in 4th century Macedonia, took place first, and then the burnt remains were placed in special urns or chests accompanied by valuable grave offerings. Now, the Macedonian tomb at Phoinikas came to light in the spring of 1987 during the digging of trial trenches in the area that was to be traversed by a bypass linking Thessaloniki with Chalkidiki. To the south, east of the tomb, a large burial mound existed, earlier known as the Kistumba, and the whole area eventually proved to be part of an extensive cemetery of the classical and early Hellenistic periods. The tomb was initially covered by a low tumulus, while a stepped dromos, a passageway, carved into the hard rock, leads to the imposing doorway. The door opening, almost 3 meters in height, which dominates the center of the facade, was blocked by 6 bulky stones, while inside it was originally sealed by a wooden double door. It is the largest single-chamber tomb found to date, with great emphasis placed on the vertical axis. The facade is almost 5 meters wide, and has the same height up to the horizontal cornice, forming a perfect square. Together with the pediment, the total height is almost 60 meters. The facade is well preserved and displays the Doric order in all its austere majesty, with colored plaster emphasizing the architectural features. the entablature, the antecapitals of the pilasters, and the door frame. 8 dark blue triglyphs flank 7 white metopes. In each of them is depicted the simple form of a fiali, presumably of metal, rendered in gold brush strokes with blue paint on the omphalos. Darker brush strokes emphasize the wide rim, while one side of the bowl is shadowed with 3 shades of color to give the effect of depth. A compass was used to draw the concentric circles, and you can see here the whole of the compass. The painted composition on the pediment covers a triangular surface only half a meter high. Unfortunately, the removal of the raking cornice due to the ancient grave robbers has destroyed the central part of the representation. Even at the edges, the details of the figures are lost, and their volumes are simply delineated against the dark blue background. However, the fact that the surviving individual elements recall motifs familiar from the funerary iconography of the classical period was of considerable assistance in arriving at the interpretation of the subject. At the left end of the pediment, gold, yellow, and reddish brush strokes are used to delineate a small, half-open chest, probably a valuable casket containing a golden wreath. Next to this, a reclining young man is depicted holding a spear in his left hand and slightly leaning on a large shield. A draped himation in shades of red is wound around the lower part of his body. To the right of this figure is a rectangular table in a warm yellow with an undefined red vessel on it, followed by the central part of the representation, where the painted surface is almost completely lost. Even so, the basic theme seems to be a scene of dexiosis, a handshake, between an imposing seated figure and a standing male wearing a short chiton and himation, towards whom 2 more standing men are turned. It is not easy to determine the sex of the seated figure, but the faint indication of a straight object, probably a staff, suggests that it is a man, rendered in a type familiar from the corresponding themes in classical grave reliefs. Continuing to the right, a sturdy horse can be made out, shown from the side, and cantering, followed by a round shield next to a stele with a pedimental crowning. Finally, at the corner of the pediment, there is the figure of another young man leaning slightly to the right. He wears a short-sleeved chiton and a leather cuirass, and in his left hand holds a helmet with long cheek pieces. The iconographic type of the 2 warriors and the presence of what is presumably a grave stele recall similar scenes on white ground lithography dating mainly from the late 5th century BC and involving seated figures of youths lost in their own remote world. There is also an interesting similarity between the 2 warriors and the figures found on late Apulian vases of the second half of the 4th century. So, the synthesis on the pediment of the Phoinikas tomb may be assigned to the type of the narrative multifigural composition, the starting point for which are the funerary marble vases at Attic grave stele, mainly of the 2nd quarter of the 4th century. Its main axis is formed by the theme of the 2 men shaking hands, to which the other figures are turned. The whole scene is supplemented by the presence of weapons and, above all, the horse indicating the high social rank of the dead and his capacity as a horseman and warrior. In ancient Greek funerary art, the gesture of the handshake, the dexiosis, is usually rendered in images interpreted as the farewell of the warrior or his return, expressing the unbreakable bonds of the family. Nevertheless, the deeper meaning of this representation would have been unclear without the two figures in the edges, which seem to depict warriors already dead. So, we can suggest that the scene unfolds in the underworld and identify the deceased in the figure of the standing man, meeting one of his ancestors or even his own father, who had preceded him in death and is now extending his hand in welcome. The representation of their reunion in the afterlife is watched by the two armed figures who were perhaps comrades of the deceased. Now, I'm sorry for a minute. Concerning the archaeometrical study of the pediment decoration, due to its bad state of conservation, it was impossible to obtain even the little sample of the remaining color traces. Nevertheless, the surviving elements allow us to speak of a painter who used his brush and color tones with great skill to render the volumes of the bodies and also employed chiaroscuro effects in the drapery of the garments. The austere color scale, in which the dominating colors are yellow and various shades of red, and the absence of green and even blue, reveals that the artist was using the traditional four-color palette, the well-known tetrachromy. Neither the use of ultraviolet or infrared lighting has provided remarkable new evidence at the time. This could possibly be the result of both the absence of an incised preparatory design, which would have left some traces on the porous tone, and the lack of a layer that could have absorbed part of the pigments. Therefore, the above description was mostly based on the in situ observation of the painting using different lighting sources and the detailed photography that is repeated in a regular basis, since it serves also for the control of the current state of conservation. In the interior, the barrel vault describes a perfect semicircle with a radius of 2 meters. It was originally covered with gray-blue paint, now fairly flaked, while the bright yellow oak plaster on the walls is preserved in good condition. At the springing of the vault is a sculpted Ionic entablature consisting of an epistyle with 3 tennae, relief dentils, and a corner with an inherent cyma, all emphasized by a variety of colors and resembling the decoration of the pseudo-façade at Eurydice's tomb. The top tennae of the epistyle is adorned by rosettes with a round center and the suggestion of chiaroscuro, while white palmets and lotus flowers are repeated on the blue front of the cyma. On the lower edge of the epistyle are preserved several iron nails. You can see here only a hole of this, from which may have hung garlands or wreaths. The arrangement of the chamber is also striking. It is dominated by 2 pedestals in the form of altars, set on a rectangular basis, and 2 low benches. The benches, with the stylized lion's paw lengths, will have been used to hold grave goods or offerings to the dead. The bench at the left was also used at a later date for the inhumation of another person. Raw bricks coated with plaster were added to make it wide enough to receive a lobbier where the deceased reposed. At the bottom of the pedestals is a richly decorated podium on which white palmets and lotus flowers are picked out against a black background. The main part of the pedestal is simply covered with black plaster, and the crowning has a zone with a complex meander pattern of the swastika type. The research of the interior yielded several finds that had escaped human greed and the ravages of time. Firm evidence was thus supplied for what was suggested even from the beginning, that the monument was intended and used for the burial of a married couple, the man on the right and the woman on the left, which is clear from the presence of both gold female jewelry and weapons. A most interesting find are the butts of the two iron sarisse found where they had been stuck in the ground after the tomb was sealed in a last tribute to the dead man. More precise chronological termini are provided by three particular finds. The Thasian wine amphora with the inscription Thasian Megaklidis, dating from the 3rd quarter of the 4th century BC, as well as a gold quarter stater of Philip II, a posthumous issue, and a silver drachma of Alexander the Great that accompanied the later interment on the left bench. Fragments of ivory and glass decorated elements point to the existence of two luxury wooden couches that were placed over the pedestals to receive the precious cinerary urns with the remains of the cremation of the two bodies. The couches were obviously decorated in the same way as the ones of Aie, as attested by the remaining inlaid ivory figures of excellent quality. Moreover, unique in a funerary context are the two marble eyes of different size with inlaid glass pupil and iris, as well as the 4 bronze eyelids found inside and outside the tomb. Similar findings are known from excavations of large sanctuaries, for example, Delphi or Dodoni, and they are easily interpreted as being votives or inlays for bronze statues. However, whether their presence in our monument also suggests the existence of 2 bronze busts that may have been set up near the funerary pyre and then transferred inside the tomb is an hypothesis that unfortunately cannot be confirmed. So, the evaluation of the architectural features of the tomb, taken together with the excavation record, indicates that the monument was constructed in the last quarter of the 4th century BC to receive an obviously distinguished occupant, most probably a general in the Macedonian royal army and his wife. Towards the end of the century, the monument was reopened for the rough inhumation of a 3rd man on a simple stretcher. After the excavation of 1987, the construction of the modern road was completed with the addition of an elevated bridge that covers and protects the Macedonian tomb. The surrounding area has eventually been formulated a design with a display of related visual aids. Meanwhile, in 1992, we had started another rather ambitious, I would say, effort to formulate the archaeological site in the area of Agios Athanasios, which is a modern town about 20 kilometers west of Thessaloniki and 15 kilometers east of ancient Pella. According to the ancient sources and the excavational data, we estimate that the ancient city of Halastra was located in this area at the so-called Tumbatopsin on the west bank of the Axios River. Therefore, it is highly probable that the whole site of Agios Athanasios is related to this city and its cemetery. The site of Agios Athanasios comprised, among other smaller graves, two Macedonian tombs found in the late 60s. The first one is an ordinary example of the type. It consists of two chambers and it is equipped with a Doric facade. The other one, number 2, located at the east boundaries of the modern town, is a smaller one-chamber tomb with a nice Ionic facade, once decorated by painted stucco. Both tombs date to the 3rd century BC. Less than 100 meters from the latter, there was a large tumulus whose diameter reached 90 meters, its height 18, and we estimated that it could also cover a funerary monument of the same type. In the spring of the 1994, we conducted the first trial trench along the eastern slope of the tumulus. It took 2 months of intensive efforts, during which we carried out successive trenches at the periphery of the mound, studying the stratigraphy, which could hopefully lead us to the location of the monument. At the same time, we tried really hard not to destroy the tumulus, since it was a major technical achievement of its era, which should be treated with respect. On the 15th of June 1994, our expectations were at last fulfilled. Blossomed volutes and white lilies and griffins with golden wings started to emerge from the Macedonian earth. The monument came to light slowly, while we silently tried to absorb the continuous surprises. Even when we realized that the tomb had, as usual, been looted in antiquity, we were not disappointed, since the undamaged painted facade was the ultimate reward. The tomb is a small structure with a square chamber with a side length of 3 meters. Its barrel vault is coated with white plaster, while the walls are covered with plaster arranged in colored decorative zones, thus imitating a simplified version of the so-called masonry style. A gray band at the base, followed by black and white tenier and a broad zone of vivid dark red. Traces of a large painted shield survive on the drum of the west wall. Here you can also see the small hole through which the looters entered the tomb. The springing of the vault is emphasized by a painted frieze in which rosettes and bucrania linked by white necklaces alternate on the black background. It is interesting that a quite similar band decorates the interior of a chamber tomb and Monte Sanace in Apulia, also in the 4th century BC. The imposing facade measures 460 meters wide and 416 meters high, a figure increasing to 460 meters when the central acroterion is added. The doorway was here too sealed by 3 large blocks of stone, behind which it had originally been a wooden door. The architectural features are mainly those of the Doric order, blended with a use of bright colors and unexpected Ionic detail. The painted frieze that extends between the pilasters on the surface over the lintel of the entrance. The Doric entablature consists of 9 white metopes and 10 dark blue triglyphs. The acroteria have white palmettes projecting almost 3-dimensionally from the black ground. Supple acanthostem's and lilies embellish the motif of the 2 lateral half palmettes. A golden disc, flanked by 2 lion griffins with falciform wings, dominates the center of the pediment. The fearful aspect of the mythical beasts is softened here by the form of their long tails, which end in a floral synthesis similar to that of the acroteria. As known, the frequent presence of floral compositions in the funerary monuments of the 1st century is thought to express the triumph of life over death. Griffins, too, as ancient symbols of immortality, are often found in combination with floral motifs, as we can see, for example, on the decorative band in the interior of the Persephone's tomb, or on the acroteria of the so-called Alexander sarcophagus in the Constantinople Museum. What distinguishes the representation and the Agios Athanasios is the dominating presence of the gold disc between the griffins, probably symbolizing the sun itself, eternally and endlessly reborn. However, the most interesting feature of the facade is the unique frieze above the lintel of the entrance, depicting a banquet, a scene most familiar to us from archaic and classic vase painting. In antiquity, the banquet, or the symposium, constituted one of the most common forms of recreation, and the fact that it is discussed in so many literary sources reveals its great importance in the social and cultural life of ancient Greeks. The most renowned of these works is, of course, Plato's Symposium, while another work of the late 2nd century BC, the famous Deipnosophiste by Athenaeus of Nafcratis, represents an important source of information on the order of the symposia and their related customs. It is nevertheless the first time that such a subject occurs on a funerary monument in Greece, in contrast to the numerous Etruscan wall paintings, or the diver's tomb at Paestum, or the relief friezes on the facades of rock-cut tombs in Asia Minor. Moreover, the three main figures of the motif, the reclining man, the seated woman, and the young Inochos, constitute the central theme on numerous of votive or funerary reliefs, the so-called death feast reliefs, the totemal reliefs. The painted composition on our frieze is developed on a surface only 35 centimeters high. It consists of 25 figures distributed in 3 distinct sections. The figures, worked by a rapid yet skillful hand, appear almost in relief against the dark background, which emphasizes the variety of bright colors. The central part of with the main banquet occupies the space right above the lintel. 6 men are depicted here, reclining on 3 cline, covered by colorful bedclothes and luxurious pillows, painted crimson, purple, and light blue. The 6 men wear wreaths on their heads, while fine chitons and cloaks are wrapped over their bodies. The conversation is represented by a slight play of glances between the guests, while more expressive gestures of greeting are addressed towards the figures outside the actual scene. All these are accompanied by the sound of the double flute, played by a young woman whose slender figure is one of the most recognizable ones at the banquets throughout antiquity. Another characteristic figure is the second man on the first couch, holding a specific ceremonial vessel in his right hand, a riton in the shape of a winged griffin. 3 tables are depicted here, each of them positioned in front of the 3 couches. Among them, only one is of the rectangular 3-legged type, which was prevalent during the archaic and classical periods. The other 2 are round-top tables, a type that emerged around the middle of the 4th century and gained popularity until it practically replaced the rectangular one. An interesting coincidence can be noted here. On a companion bell crater of the 3rd quarter of the 4th century, a plain round table appears together with a rectangular one, just as in the frieze of Agios Athanasios. The tables are laden with all kinds of food, common on representations of symposia, as well as on the death feast reliefs, eggs and fruits, such as pomegranates and raisins, together with some round or pyramidal elements. Here, one can recognize various sorts of breads and cakes, the so-called popana and pyramids, made of roasted wheat and honey, as quoted by literary evidence. All these constitute the after-dinner desserts, especially prepared to accompany the wine. Among the reclining male figures, there appears one woman, seated on the edge of the second couch, dressed in a long purple tunic and playing the kithara. Even the shape of the kithara is very interesting, with parallel arms and a rectangular sound box, a type which in the 4th century is almost exclusively depicted in South Italian vase painting. This so-called Italiot kithara first appears in circa 360 BC and becomes more frequent in the second half of the century on Apulian and Campanian vases. But evidence for the kithara as a source of music for banquets is very little and always concerns men kitharodi. As far as I know, the presence of a woman kithara player in a banquet scene must be unique, probably implying a close relationship to the noble host. Let's also remember here the painting of the woman playing a gilded kithara from the villa of Fannius Sinistor at Bosco Reale. The frescoes that originally adorned the villa derive from the Greek tradition of megalographia, large-scale painting, and it has been suggested that this remarkable lady may represent a Macedonian noblewoman or even a queen. The central part of the frieze is clearly defined by two elements that, although necessary for the proceeding of the actual symposium, occur in such a context for the first time. At the right side, there is a most probably marble basin, a luterion, essential for the ceremonial washing of the hands after the meal and before the banquet. Sorry. At the left side, the picture is completed by the wreathed, naked young man, the Inochos, another familiar figure, almost always present at the banquets. The fact that he is depicted naked is a clearly Greek conception, whereas on the Eastern examples and the Etruscan wall paintings, he is usually shown dressed. His slender figure, carrying a fiale in his left hand and an inochoi in the right, seems to emerge from the pages of Dipnosophiste. After they had dinner, there was silence among them, but the young boy, having the wine mixed, stood by and offered to the asking ones. Behind the young Inochos, there is a heavy piece of furniture with 3 shelves, on which gilded fiale and various other vases are displayed. A blue-gray vessel, probably a silver hydria, appears against the dark red background, while the whole composition is placed in front of a bushy tree. This is most likely the earliest representation of a furnishing, which can be identified by the term kilikion, mentioned by many ancient authors, but archaeologically attested only in later monuments. In particular, Athenos often refers to the kilikion, describing it as the place where the cups are kept if they happen to be of silver, or as full of gold vessels. It seems that the possession of such a piece was probably a sign of wealth, rather rare until the Hellenistic and Roman periods. Before that, There is only the images of supplementary side tables, sometimes with extra stretchers, bearing various vessels as they appear either on East Greek funerary reliefs or Etruscan wall paintings. It is worth mentioning that the presence of such simple kilikia in Etruscan tombs has also been interpreted as a status symbol of the aristocratic life of the deceased, perhaps influenced by the archaic Ionian style. On the right, you can also see an interesting survival of the theme, remote in time but similar in conception, a kilikion full of silver containers on a wall painting at the Palazzo Altemps in Rome of the 16th century AD. Thus, on the central part of the frieze, we have the representation of an ordinary symposium, following the classical iconographic tradition as it had developed since archaic period and had been described in literary sources. However, this typical scene is flanked by two additional ones, each bound to it with an internal relationship. On the left, we can see a rather cheerful party of three mounted men approaching with their foot companions, holding torches and various vessels full of wine. The shadows of the night play across the faces of the men and the robust bodies of the horses, while four burning torches cast light up in the dark sky. The wreaths on their heads indicate that they are probably coming from another symposium, carrying their own wine as a contribution to the feast. The shape of the apparently silver situla carried by the first servant is very interesting. It is almost identical to the bronze vessel of the late 4th century found at the ancient cemetery of Derveni near Thessaloniki. On the other side of the frieze, 8 young warriors dressed in the traditional Macedonian way and leaning on their spears and shiny shields silently watch the ritual. They bear chlamydes, the long cloaks, fastened on their right shoulder, and kripides, a kind of leather boots on their feet. Furthermore, 4 of the men are wearing the characteristic leather cap, the so-called kausia, which was proudly sported by Alexander himself into the depths of Asia. According to ancient sources, Alexander's everyday costume during the Great Campaign was a purple chlamys, a chiton, and the kafsia bearing the royal diadem. Of course, the kausia, diadematophoros, was worn only by the king. On the other hand, the plain white cap could be worn by Macedonian generals as well as by the royal bodyguards and the royal pages, as for example by the hunter of the mural painting of Aegean, who has been identified as the young Ptolemy. Besides, the 3 first men with the white kafsias are depicted bearing leather corselets with wide shoulder straps, a type that constituted a main element of the defensive armor of Macedonian officers. There are several other representations of this type of breastplate, and of course it is the same type that Alexander is wearing in the famous mosaic of the Battle of Issos. The 2 next figures bear brilliant winged helmets with high crests and white plumes, similar to the actual ones of the so-called Macedonian type. I should also underline here their resemblance to the description of the bright helmet worn by Alexander in the battlefield. According to Plutarch, during the Granicus battle, the enemies rushed upon Alexander, for he was conspicuous by his helmet's crest, on either side of which was fixed a plume of wonderful size and whiteness. Finally, 3 of the men hold the well-known Macedonian shields with their particular rimless shape, familiar mostly from coins and literary references, decorated with the winged thunderbolt or the starburst emblem. Asclepiodotos, the later writer on military tactics, describes this specific Macedonian bronze shield as the best among the shields of the phalanx. So, even if the central part of the painting could take place in any other Greek region, this section constitutes a speaking symbol of the specific place, as the presence of the warriors attests that here we are witnessing a symposium in Macedonia. Even the space where the banquet takes place is indicated by the depiction of the Luterion and the tree behind the Kilikion. Most probably it is an inner yard or the peristylion of a wealthy private house, like those at nearby Pella, where all the necessary equipment has been transferred. Invitations to the friendly gathering would have been extended to the house owner's comrades, both mature men and younger ones. It is, in other words, a banquet between comrades in arms, accompanied by the mounted procession and the strong presence of weapons, having deep roots in aristocratic societies in which these elements reflect the corresponding heroic ideals. Also, the fact that the second banqueteer is shown holding the laboratory tone in his raised right hand, combined with his position precisely on the central axis of the frieze, indicates that he is the main figure in the synthesis and should be recognized as the noble host, obviously a high-ranking military officer. Though our excitement reached its peak at the moment of the revealing of the figures of the two young men that flanked the entrance of the tomb. Almost life-size in height, 145 the left and 152 meters the right one, they may constitute the first actual specimens of ancient Greek megalographia. Similarly dressed in long cloaks on top of their short tunics, with their leather kafsians on their head, they lean against their Macedonian long spears, the famous arisi. Above their heads, two hanging shields with striking devices in bright colors are depicted. On the bright red ground of the right shield is depicted the winged thunderbolt of choice, the god who was so strongly present in the religious beliefs of the Macedonians as the father of their mythical ancestor Heracles. A lively gorgonion of the so-called beautiful type is projected against the violet background of the other shield. The tossed hair and the two snakes with their tails tied beneath the jaw are the only elements that recall the earlier fearsome figure of the Medusa with her apotropaic signification. The costume and general appearance of the two youths is similar to that of the men on the frieze, though the larger scale introduces greater freedom in the rendering of details, including even their individual facial features. The youth at the left is shown with calm brown eyes shadowed by grief and his lips drawn into a faint smile. The features of his right counterpart are shown with greater intensity. His forehead is wrinkled and the eyes narrow as he tries to hold back a tear on the verge of falling. One can guess his lips clenched in sorrow that the young man is trying to disguise with a hand wrapped in his chlamys. His pose recalls an iconographic type common in Attic grave reliefs of the second half of the 4th century that goes back at least to the middle of the previous century. It is impossible to ignore the similarity with the severe style relief of the grieving Athena, not only in the stance of the figures, but also in the similarity of conception in the restrained expression of emotions. Thus, The facade of this Macedonian tomb provided essential evidence for the study of the late classical and Hellenistic painting, which up to recently was believed to be lost forever. It is obvious that the competent painter of the tomb at Agios Athanasios was quite familiar to all the achievements of monumental painting that had been developed, especially during the 4th century, concerning colors, harmony, and shading methods, as well as the rendering of three-dimensional space. He is mostly sensitive to the chromatic values of his work. The painted synthesis is mainly based on the interrelation of the colors, their contrasts, and the skillful use of the hues, while the role of the outlines is rather limited. The large number of color gradations in the representation of the frieze, the play of pinks and purples, the strong presence of blue, the discrete appearance of green, and the addition to the artist's palette of more expensive colors as cinnabar and murex purple demonstrate that he has been liberated from the strict four-color scale and adapted a richer, brighter palette. In contrast to the variety of the bright colors used in the frieze and the shields, in the rendering of the two hues, he uses mainly earth colors and more severe shades, based on the traditional values of a system, the tetrachromy, that continued to be applied by the great painters of the late classical period. The chiaroscuro effect was achieved here by a systematic use of shadows and highlights. On the two figures, gray, a mixture of black and white, has been widely used for the cold tones, while yellow, red, and brown, also mixed with black and white, have been used for the creation of the warm tones. The materials of the painting have been examined by means of optical microscopy and various analytical methods, such as XRD and FTIR. Most of the pigments used derived from natural minerals, red, yellow, or brown ochre, as well as fine cinnabar, or they are artificial made as the lead white and the well-known Egyptian blue, in different mixtures to give darker or lighter blue shades. Organic pigments have also been identified, carbon black and bone black, as well as the organic purple used mostly for the violet pink background of the left shield, the so-called purpurissum by Plinius, a most expensive and not widely employed pigment. Yet, the quality and quantity of pure cinnabar on the background of the right shield is impressive, as it was also considered as a rather expensive pigment. Besides, infrared photography has revealed random drops of color dispersed on the facade, as well as corrections of the drawing, all of them covered by white lime water. This is obvious, for example, and the displacement of the painted iron nail and its cast shadow over the right shield. More radical changes are observed regarding the rendering of the two guards. The sarissa, which the youth on the left is holding, has been shifted to the right, while the second figure has been completely moved out 10 centimeters, also to the right. All these indicate that the painter did not use an already existing preliminary sketch which could be applied to the wall of the monument and be safely copied. On the contrary, it seems that he worked on the surfaces freehand, correcting the inevitable mistakes until he reached the desired result. Anyway, the quest for the revealing of the hidden secrets of the paintings never stopped, even after 30 years of the discovery. Innovative, non-invasive methods are continuously employed by experts, as well as at Phoinikas tomb. As we speak, we are anxiously expecting the results of the latest application of last September. Now, the investigation of the interior, though highly damaged by the grave robbers, yielded the remains of a luxurious wooden couch, decorated with inlaid ivory figures of excellent quality, like the ones of Phoinikas. It would also have been placed over the rectangular porous base located by the south wall to receive the cremated remains of the distinguished deceased. Another very interesting find was the fragmentary alabastron bearing the inscription Krokos, saffron, indicating that the vessel once contained the scented extract of the expensive plant used during the funerary rituals. Moreover, countless of iron fragments were collected scattered on the floor, from which the armor of the dead man has been gradually restored. Nearly all the parts of ancient Greek armor are represented here. Among them remains of an iron helmet, a large hoplite shield, and two spearheads. A pair of iron greaves was reconstructed, a unique find to date, as all the other surviving examples are made of bronze. Subsequently, our conservators were able to reassemble an iron leather-coated cuirass, almost identical to the one found in the royal tomb of Aie, without the gold decoration. So the finds appear to be the complete weaponry of a companion, an heteros of the royal cavalry, as represented in the various burial monuments of Macedonia, but also in the painted decoration of his own tomb. The rest of the grave goods, obviously precious, were stolen by the looters, who had entered the tomb through the small hole on the west wall. Yet, the deposition here of a gold coin of Philip II, again of a post-human issue, as well as of a bronze coin of the same period, provide chronological indication for the burial in the last quarter of the 4th century BC, and dating in accordance to the other excavational data. This exceptional discovery was one of the most important archaeological news of that decade, as it obviously is a unique monument of Greek culture, which aroused the intense interest of scientific circles in Greece and abroad. It has been presented through lectures in international conferences, while it is a point of reference for numerous studies concerning ancient Greek painting and the history of Macedonia. Unfortunately, and despite the fact that the plans for the building of a permanent protective cell and the reconstruction of the tumulus were ready and approved by the Greek Ministry of Culture since 1998, a series of bureaucracy issues have inexcusably stalled its construction. 10 years later, in October of 2008, and in accordance with totally new designs, the construction finally began, and it lasted until May of 2012. At that period, we were able to conduct a brief archaeological research in the areas that had not been thoroughly studied during the excavation of 1994 in order to avoid further disturbance of the monument. The most important find was then the complete revealing of the ancient dromos, opened in the natural ground of the tumulus leading to the entrance of the monument. Its length of 24 meters and its width of 4 meters render this the longest road that gives access to a Macedonian tomb found to date. Summarizing the above, it is apparent that the painted facades of the two Macedonian tombs afford much new and interesting evidence for the study of funerary iconography and capture the variety of figurative manners that could be used to give expression at the same period to the eschatological beliefs of the Macedonians. The composition of the pediment of Phoinikas still moves in a context in which Death was accepted with restrained dignity and austere expressive means, as formulated in the consciousness of the Greeks already in the early classical period. The cruel blow of destiny is alleviated by faith in an afterlife and the anticipation of reunion with dead friends and relatives. In contrast, the painting of the tombed Agios Athanasios appears to go beyond the borders of the classical rule. Its creator skillfully manipulates the play of delusion and produces striking scenery for the burial ritual. The treatment of the frieze on a smaller scale than the rest of the decoration creates the impression that the whole subject is retreating into the background. It is projected on a wall separate from the pilasters of the façade, which also appear to be freestanding. The trompe-l'œil produced by the artful use of perspective depth and the three-dimensional quality of the figures is particularly obvious in the rendering of the two full-length figures. The representation is also the expression of the innermost hope of life after death, from which the delight of good companionship and the pleasure of wine are not absent. This hope culminates in the acroterian pediment, in which the depiction of the two griffins, combined with the eternal sun, the source of life, does not merely hint at the continuation of existence after death, but also expresses the idea of regeneration and hymns the triumph of life. Finally, I would like to thank all those who accompanied me during this 30 years fascinating journey, and certainly all of you for your attendance this evening. I really hope that you enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
We thank you, Dr. Tsimpidou, for your vivid, informative, and well-structured presentation of these unique finds. We're very fortunate to have you this evening.
Thank you.
I have the honor of inviting Professor Robin Lane Fox to give the vote of thanks. Robin Lane Fox is Emeritus Fellow at New College, Oxford, and we are very proud that he's a GACUK patron and a specialist on ancient Greek Macedonia and Alexander the Great. Professor Lane Fox, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope you can now hear me. What can I say? The Archaeological Committee has had 67 lectures. I do not believe that in the previous 66, we have ever seen such stupendous riches culminating in these wonderful paintings. I would like, of course, to thank Maria, if I may also, for her excellent English text. And I'd like especially to mention, as she did at the end, all those in Greece who work on the conservation of these amazing finds of the last 50 years. This really is a triumph for Greek conservation, technique, excavation, and archaeology. I am so thankful, if I may say it, that they were not found in, shall we say, Albania. They have been marvelously kept in the very best condition we could hope for. Now, there's so much I'd like to say. Perhaps I could add a personal note. Maria, I too have a magnificent horse. I have a white Corsair, which I acquired in Pakistan. I'm very touched and, of course, delighted to find that cavalrymen, as maybe I one day will have to be, are buried in such distinction. Very briefly, three things. That magnificent horse that you so well show in outline on the Phoinikas lost painting, that is no normal horse. That is an immensely strong breed of horse, belonging with your view that this is a very important cavalryman. That seems to me a really critical thing. And secondly, the amazing scenes that we end with on the Agios Athanasios facade. They remind us of literary accounts of symposia, and people might like to read in Athenaeus, the Banqueters, the book in chapter in book 4, where he quotes a long, famous letter about a magnificent symposium celebration given in Macedon, which is very much an elaborate, even grander pair to the one you're showing. And also, if I could just say, the importance of looking again at the plays known through the Latin versions in New Comedy, that they use Greek originals. People have said that it is a Latin feature, that in, say, Plautus's Stychus, there is a banquet in a garden at the end. We can no longer say that. We see that these symposia, as you so beautifully showed, were held outdoors. Well, what else can one say? So much. We knew from, of course, coins, and eventually the Greco-Bactrian coins, the gift of portraiture of these strong, tough military men. Phoinikas, we are told, had his own portrait painting. These people were grand masters of the universe. But now we see in these marvelous paintings, as on the tombs in Vergina, the ability for portrait art. And I'd like to end, if I may, Maria, apart from such thanks and congratulations to you, for something really those watching should and will never forget. Just one personal view. How sad it was that the great masters, so-called, of the Italian Renaissance never saw real Greek painting that you and others have uncovered in the last 50 years. Think how different even Michelangelo might have been if he could have seen your two figures, particularly the one on the right with the teardrop, the pose. This is a really marvelous thing. They were working from Roman rubbish when they pioneered what they thought was their originality. But you have shown it was all there, as always, in the Greek world, to be found by a brilliant Greek archaeologist with a brilliant team, and preserved as really only Greek teams have been able to do in archaeological discovery through the world. I wish that Leonardo and Michelangelo could come back and see it. They would, like all of us, gasp, or like me, really almost want to cry. It's marvelous. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. So,
a heartfelt thank you and a big round of applause for our speaker, Dr. Maria Tsimpidou Avlonitou, for her splendid presentation, as well as for our for Professor Robin Lane Fox for giving such an interesting vote of thanks. If you wish to contact us, make a donation and be on our mailing list. All information is on the screen now, and the copy can be found on chat, which you can download. Help us to help young, promising archaeologists, and so keep classics alive in the UK. Thank you all for attending this evening. Please also note that our lectures now are recorded, and you can find them on our website. We have a YouTube channel, so you can visit and see again this splendid lecture. Thank you all. Good night.